Welcome to Cityscape, a podcast from the Committee for Sydney. Mark Tewdwr-Jones is a Professor of Town Planning at Newcastle University and the Director of Newcastle City Futures. He's globally recognised as an authority on urban planning, city governance and the use of land. He was in Sydney and sat down for a chat with our Chief Executive, Dr. Tim Williams.
We're part of a four-sided international network of future cities, and it's Newcastle University from the UK, Groningen, Hong Kong, and University of New South Wales. And we started about 2 years ago as a network of universities and city authorities in the four places to look at what the universities are doing to give something back to the places in which they're located. How are we going to join up incredible new research work on cities in those places with business opportunities, public service delivery and transformation, and innovative engagement. So this is our Sydney visit, and we're here to identify what's going on in Sydney, to see whether we can learn, the other three cities can learn issues from Sydney's experience and New South Wales' experience, to let Sydney and New South Wales know what we're up to in our respective cities, to create a conversation about where cities are going, the shape that they are, whether the plan system is useful or not in the process, and taking into account, if you like, some of the big drivers of change which are affecting how we normally think about places as well.
It's interesting. There's so much in that actually, because one, it's about what universities are up to, which again is completely nothing like what people would think a university are up to. They're much more, maybe actually in a sense, doing some of the old stuff the universities used to do, which is to take an interest in the society around them, in a city around them. But it's also got collaboration with various sectors in it, but it's also, I think, interestingly got governance in it, which is an attempt to say this is not just kind of floating rib research. This is like, what are the key problems for the city and how can we help as universities, I guess. Now, the challenge over here, you know the Sydney terrain and the Australian terrain as well as UK terrain and internationally, is that we've got a governance gap, actually, in a city like this at a metropolitan level. So I think the problem is to actually, in a sense, who can we work with from a university perspective. So how do you see the kind of Australian cities challenge? Cities here have been described as orphans of public policy. Yeah,
I to be honest, I don't think there are that many differences between Sydney's experiencing and what many other cities around the world are experiencing. It's how your governance is fit for purpose in terms of a rapidly changing environment and also very disruptive mechanisms. So if you think about the smart and digital opportunities, you're into a game where, the biggest cinema chain owns no cinemas and the biggest taxi firm own no taxis, which have a major difference or real estate implication. And the governance element is almost playing catch up to these very agile, very disruptive, innovative processes. And there's a lag then between the public service transformation and the incredible fast-paced move in world of the digital startup SME community and the corporates playing a role in that. But the reason why I suppose Newcastle City Futures, which is one of the mechanisms as part of our network, the reason why that started 4 years ago was essentially the same issue. We had problems with the governance. A major region which is in political turmoil occasionally, where different parts of the region are at war with themselves, an ability to want to do something that's long-term and visionary, but being perhaps handicapped by the politics and the institutional mechanisms, and a desire on the part of business to do something dynamic for the city. So into that space steps the university. And it supports your view, Tim, about the university playing a very different role to the traditional business role of teaching and research. This is where maybe the university can broker something in research, development, innovative projects, innovative engagement, which will help public services, help governance, if they're willing to receive that help.
Well, on that thing, essentially, it takes two to tango. And I think, for me, the good sign of all this is that the other institutions in civic society are up for collaboration, and universities coming to the table. It's great. The Committee of Sydney has played some of this role, and we've got 5 university members in Sydney. But it's great to see the universities, with their capacity to actually research some of these problems, come forward. I think the challenge is, and we see it a lot, is that we've got something like 25 government agencies in Sydney. We haven't got a kind of London government thing trying to knock things together around single strategies. It's quite complicated. We've just done a report, which I urge you to have a look at, called We the City No. 3. And its subtitle is Towards a Data-Driven and Responsive Sydney. Okay, and so we see great examples within the silos. Yes. But not so much scaling up of kind of smart city initiatives. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's an issue. I mean, I never talk of Newcastle in the UK as a smart city, partly because everyone talks themselves as a smart city. Right? That's right. And if you're that smart, you don't need to label yourself as smart. But
that has been my life experience, by the way. So there you go.
But cities have fundamental challenges and big structural changes. So one of the issues for the northeast of England is, chronic rundown of public services, austerity, Brexit on the horizon, and the region has to stand up for itself. But we're into a realm where long-term thinking is problematic. So if we're going to harness all that smart and data opportunity that's there, and the region is one of the fastest, I think it is the fastest growing digital region outside London in the UK. How are we going to harness that in terms of some of the bigger social problems that exist? So a lot of our projects the university is brokering is that can we pull in different partners from the public, private, community, academic sectors to shape pilot projects which are smart and socially inclusive. And if you can enable that form of trust to occur, develop projects which are admittedly pilots, but they have the opportunity of scaling up and exportability. So in the process, you create a business growth opportunity, a research excellent opportunity for the universities, the citizens and communities at the heart of the design of it, and also the public service transformation in the process, the holy grail. If you can do it through pilots and they work, why not scale it up and think about bigger transformation on the back of it? But it's very difficult to embark on that wider, broader transformational change at the outset because you're dealing with legacies, issues, politics that get in the way. So if you can do it where the university is willing to take on the risk of developing the pilot and then share the intellectual property, it's a terrible business model for the university, share that intellectual property amongst the partners in the region, some of which might be multinationals, that puts the region on the map and it creates a growth opportunity into the future.
So there's so much in all that. I was going to ask about the business model of all this because, the thing that's quite shocking, I think, for people not in universities, and I've got a tangential relationship with them, is that they are much more business-oriented than I ever understood when I was a student in one of them, But at the same time, does that mean that all of this has to be a transactional really, or is there some skin in the game that universities bring to the table?
I think it depends on the different universities' experience on this. I think we started in Newcastle University saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we signed some memoranda of understanding with the big firms? Let's sign an MOU with Google and Microsoft. And you think, what's the point in doing that? All universities are trying to do the same. And actually, it's just a bit of paper. What is more meaningful is if we develop incredible projects. So we link it to the assets that already are investments in the university where the great research work is going on. We make it visible and meaningful for small businesses and communities in the city, whether it's a capital project or a virtual project. And then on the back of that, we can invite the corporates to be part of it. But it's not a free-for-all. Essentially, if the corporates want to come in and be part of our projects, we share the intellectual property. The big guns have to work with the startups and the SMEs, so we retain some potential in the region, and we create research out of it, as well as the public ultimately benefiting from this. So I think maybe that was based on our own experience and our own set of assets. We're a big urban data university. We have incredible digital civics going on there. We have great work on planning and on community interaction, but we're an aging city, so you start to see the pieces of the jigsaw all line about the city, and you think what's needed is some mechanism of convenience that pulls these together, but ultimately doesn't try and control it. Now, that's the beauty maybe of having the university become the broker and facilitator in here, because essentially we're taking on the risk, but we're creating the opportunities for others to be part of the city, but ultimately to benefit themselves.
So look, I'm a big fan of the central. Forget the digital stuff in a sense, but behind this, I think, is just that cities collaborate to compete, and that essentially within that is a public-private collaboration. Universities are playing a more muscular role, if you like, in some of this stuff, and I think that's very welcome. And I suppose I'm sure a mutual colleague of ours, but Greg Clark, written a lot about the business of cities, actually. He says that cities have 4 kinds of teams, and I like this idea. One is a city council, whatever scale. The horizontal link between councils across a metropolitan area. The link then with government tiers above, and then the link with the private sector. They need 4 teams, effectively. Now, you seem to be playing in a number of these teams. Let me ask you about one team. I'm a bit old-fashioned, I am, about this, which is I like to see big city government, you see, and I know it should be networked, and I know it should be virtual, and I know it should be all that, but I do like to see some traditional city leadership. Now, I went to Boston recently, right, and I went to see the Office of Urban Mechanics, which must be the best title for any of this stuff, right?
That's a great title.
It's a great title, right? And what I loved about they're 2 things about this. One is that they are feeding back into city performance, the city's performance, the council's performance, the data they're getting. So there's a real attempt to try and link what you're learning with kind of the organisation that has some responsibility. The second thing is they've just done a smart city playbook, and it's the first line, I kid you not, is great. And I actually said this at a Committee for Sydney event in which there were a lot of the companies present, and I said, they say, don't send us your salesmen, right? And what they say, second line, send us people who know about our problems, who think about cities. Start with that stuff, and then we'll work out together what the technical implications are. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was on a panel with representatives of City Council in Newcastle a couple of weeks ago, and it was in one of those pitches, essentially. So we were receiving major businesses who were coming in and saying, this is what they do in other cities, this is what we could do here, and it was very much off-the-shelf stuff. Now, I realise that is a business model, and I recognise what they're playing at, but a lot of them hadn't done their homework. So one company said, hey, we've got 3 sensors in the city that we're working with. And one of my professorial colleagues who does the urban data stuff, said, I've got 600 in the city centre. And it was like, oh, wow, there's a lot going on here already that we didn't buy into or we didn't know about. And that's the critical thing, that they're incredible opportunities. But perhaps some of the challenges about unlocking these opportunities is making people and organizations in the city think of their city in a different sort of way to the usual. So there may be assets in a place which are unique to that place, which are unidentified by the relevant organizations, including government in some cases, but other companies see them as an asset, or at least are looking for them because they've identified somewhere else. So Newcastle as an aging city is a good example of that, of saying, well, initially the conversation is about the major social and resource trauma about us being an aging city and with the taxation base and so on, or the implication for public services, public transport and the built environment. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But don't forget the other half of the equation, which is the incredible business opportunities from being an aging city and an innovative aging city as well, where that's linked into the university agent science work that's built into the planning and transport expertise. Right. And then you become a testbed city of innovation for aging and its implications for other sectors and other disciplines. And from that, you can scale it up.
I think that's, I'm, by the way, for anybody listening, I'm having trouble interrupting because, of course, Mark is actually a Welshman like myself.
It's a non-stop, absolutely non-stop.
But what I was going to say was so I think that's really good because you can get fatalistic about places like Newcastle. There's some tough places. People, I think, don't really know in some Australian cities how tough some of these places are, right? And Newcastle is up there, But also, you said one of the fastest growing digital sort of economies in the UK. So that's really interesting. But I also like the idea that you're trying to solve some essential problems, but also use the assets that you have and exploit them. I also think it's important that not all change needs to be massive change. You need to show people proofs of concept, especially with the smart city stuff. I think they're going to see, wow, you can do things differently, and we need that over here. Our procurement processes are too laborious, too centralized. They lead to the usual suspects being appointed instead of encouraging this innovation from below.
I mean, we've had what I call on times prophecy of doom messages from politicians about us being terrible, and London doesn't take any notice, and you think, oh well, yeah, that's not a new story, but we've got to be seen to be standing up and doing something ourselves. So the proof of concept, the projects, is a way of people to develop that sense of partnership and trust around something very specific and visible in the city. So best project to date is something that Arup are involved with called Future Homes.
Right.
And we said, what are the housing options for people over 60 long term? And you think sheltered accommodation, going into a home, maybe living in the family home if that's feasible, with major care issues associated with it. But 1 in 4 people are going to live to 100 in the UK in 20 years' time. So there's got to be a different offer on the table. So could we think of the future home as an asset, as an opportunity space? And we started to think about whether we could design homes which would be digitally enabled, which would be the most sustainable, energy efficient, plug your electric car into your home, but also meet the needs of a life course. So you could build different houses and design and change the technology to represent firms' expertise in the region. You could showcase that. You could design something with the architects locally that then becomes relevant for other cities undergoing aging in other parts of the world, including the Far East. And also that technology is changeable, but it creates a research project. So we have digitally enabled housing for the life course, which is about housing design, smart technology, energy efficiency, aging, science and innovation and research within the university. And we have 8 partner organizations from public, private, community and academic sectors. And Arup are playing a key role in that. And it's got the stage where Legal and General have recognized the opportunity. So we have funding.
The biggest house builder in the country. This is a very amazing development.
Right.
So an insurance company is really interested.
That's right, and it's an investment possibility. Yeah. But we've managed to get the IP right, so the IP is shared. So we got funding from the Homes and Communities Agency to build 4 demonstrator houses, but we're already now talking about 200 units in other parts of the region, which will be meaningful back to the needs of that community in the northeast.
So I've got one last thing, which is apart from commending all that, I think the way in which we need to develop new business models, new prototype things, rather than wait 5 years to an evaluation to show that they were the wrong things. It's just fail early, fail fast, or whatever. We need lots of that, and to be a bit braver about this stuff, because there's, and also to show people the kind of change that we want. They've got to see it. You see, people are skeptical here.
That agility, I think that's the critical thing for cities and institutions in cities, is how to be agile, how to I don't say integrate different things that don't normally integrate, but how to get alignment. If you've got cogs of the wheel and they come together at the right moment, an agency, a set of organizations need to be sufficiently agile to get in there at that time and start to make a difference very quickly. We know big public agencies normally are not that agile. So in our case, and in the network's case, it's the universities that are willing to take on the risk in that space.
Look, I think that's an internationally interesting model. There are some people putting their toe in the water here into the universities thinking about this. Western Sydney University, UTS, they're beginning to look at stuff. So it's the right time to have this conversation. The last thing, very much the last thing, although I could go on a long time, is we've got this concept emerging in our Greater Sydney Commission plan. The concept of the Greater Sydney Commission is an important one as well. First metro-style sort of planning authority of collaboration areas. Right, there are 9 collaboration areas. They seem to me to have a university or research elements within them. And I suppose where I'm going with this is that actually they need to remember that they are sort of placemaking in a digital era, and that the collaboration is great, but there are collaborations on the ground, but also what kind of sort of almost like digital kind of partnership can you I want to ask this in conclusion. I sometimes think when we talk about the smart city stuff that we do sometimes forget the traditional virtues of placemaking, or that in a sense that the best discussion is placemaking in a digital era. And where this comes to really hit the economic kind of the rubber hits the road is around innovation districts. It's this whole concept of we've now rediscovered that knowledge jobs are actually agglomerating in certain places. Therefore, we need to feed those places. We need more of those places, and all this kind of stuff. Is that conversation alive in the UK at the moment?
Yeah, I think it is. There's a danger that innovation districts are seen as science parks that are remote from the rest of the city or the region, and if they're put in a container almost and isolated from everything else, they will fail.
It's their interaction.
So it's the interaction that you have. Why expect people to go into those great shiny glass edifices, where there'll be academics and experts? What are the experts doing to get out and interact with the rest of the city and the region? And in relation to innovation itself, I mean, in the UK we have smart specializations, which tend to be the priority economic themes for each city, each region, and that's great, but it's rather safe. So I tend to provoke actors in the region and say, look, the real space for innovation is the interaction between the smart specializations. So if you have digital as one smart specialization, that's nothing in itself, unless you also interacting with the other smart specializations, whether it's biomedicine, whether it's age in science and so on. That's the true innovation opportunity, is putting yourself in between the comfort zones and maximizing the opportunities, but someone's got to go in there.
And I conclude by all that's grist to the mill, and we will make sure that lots of people hear this conversation, because it's really important. We're very welcome the initiative that you're part of. It's very relevant to the conversation here. I end on the apparent paradox of if anybody knows South Wales, they will know it's not a paradox at all, that the two guys from the valleys telling Australians and others how to shape their cities is only a paradox if you've never been to Treorchy, which is where you're from.
Absolutely. Right? So, I don't know if I'm allowed back these days. They've heard about
no, the valleys are gated from me, so you're safer than I am. Mark Tewdr-Jones, thank you. Thank you very much.
No, thanks, Dave.